Good afternoon, everyone. It's 12 o'clock and we'll get started. This is Pat Rickard. I'm the president of CASAS. And I want to mention that this year is our 40th anniversary. We've had a long history of working first as a California consortium and then as a national consortium. And so it's very important as we move forward together that we're working with you in this unprecedented time to try to reach out to our students and maintain their learning and their testing in a remote environment. We're really excited to share what we're doing and what we've learned and what we will continue to do to support you, to support your learners, and to support your agencies in maintaining a learning and testing environment with the population that we're serving. We have a lot to learn. We're going to learn together, and you're going to be a part of our collaboration and our partnership as you have been for many, many years. And we very much appreciate that. We are very excited to share with you some innovative solutions that we might have that we think are going to be a win-win for everyone, for your learners, your states, and your agencies. But we're also very concerned about maintaining security and ensuring the quality assessment delivery, because the validity of that test score and the learning gains and the outcomes are really predicated on following all of the test security guidelines. And so we're really challenged in how we're going to do that in a remote environment, but we think it's doable, it's possible, and that's what we want to share with you today. So Linda, I'm going to turn it over to you to go through the agenda for this webinar.
Thanks, Pat. Welcome, everybody. If you could, please do type your name, state, and role, as well as your email in the chat box. That way we'll know who actually made it on the call. There's so many of you, and really appreciate that you're taking the time to hear what we have to say. And I imagine you're waiting with somewhat with bated breath to hear, and we're very excited to tell you. Here's our agenda. We're going to tell you what our plans are for remote testing. We have 3 phases, and after an overview, and I'm going to tell you about phase 1, which is right now in the next 2 weeks. But just so you know right off the bat that starting May 4th is when we roll out to those who are interested. So that's when, if you'd like to get started, unless you're part of our clinical tryout and pilot, that's when you can begin. And then we have a phase 3, which we'll explain in a bit. We're going to leave some time at the end for questions and comments, if any of you have them, which I'm sure you will. And if, as we go, if you have questions, if you could type them into the chat box, we'll be checking. If it's something that we're going to be covering later, we'll let you know. And I'll be pausing every so often to see if we can answer any questions that are relevant for that time. All right, so an overview of this of remote tested. We wanted to start, and maybe you, most of you are already familiar, but in case you're not, with it's, you know, things are changing so quickly, but Octave put out a guidance just last Friday, as well as one a couple weeks ago. And so in that guidance that came out on Friday, it's memo 20-4, they really stated very clearly that they are providing states with flexibility about assessment. So I think they're trying to make it clear that it is a state decision as to whether or not to try to proceed with remote testing at this time. So we just really wanted to make sure you understood that option is there. And in the second bullet here, that this is also in this just Friday's memo, that states may allow local programs to exempt students enrolled in distance education programs from pre and post testing if a local program is unable to conduct testing because of this pandemic. So those are their words, and just to reassure you that that is the case. And of course, if you're game for remote testing right now, we're ready to go on that ride with you. But some states we already know have decided to hold off for a while and wait. Another aspect of the OCTAE guidelines right now is that they're asking states to specify the time frame in which if you are making exemptions for students that you cannot pre and post test because of the virus, specify that time frame and identify students who are exempted. And a little bit later in the presentation, I'm going to show you that we have added a field in TOPS Pro Enterprise where you can do that. Of course, you can do it in any way you prefer. This final bullet here is telling about what OCTAE explained in a previous memo, and that is that if you decide to do remote testing with NRS approved assessments, you must follow publisher guidelines, and specifically in the areas of student ID. We need to authenticate that the person taking the test is that student. Test security, which Pat already mentioned, and you're going to hear throughout that that's something that we have to really look out for in a very big way. And then training of proctors who already know how to give the test face-to-face, but are not at all familiar with how to do it remotely from their homes. So on April 9th, OCTAE convened a meeting with all of the test publishers, and that's where we shared the status of our progress on remote testing and what we were planning, and had an opportunity to hear what OCTAE was thinking. And then just last Friday, our CASAS staff met with OCTAE, Cheryl Keenan, Jay Lemaster, and others, Larry Condelli, and we presented to them our plans for remote testing, and they blessed it. They said we have permission to roll out remote testing. And in fact, we were quite proud to share with you that Cheryl said that she was quite impressed with our remote testing plan and timeline. So we feel it's been a very steep learning curve, but we have really figured out solutions, and we're going to share them with you. So first, to think a little bit about what are the benefits of remote testing. One is to allow you to provide a continuation of services. Post-testing, students that have achieved have studied enough hours and are ready to test and hopefully get an MSG. We know that you're getting new students because of the high unemployment rates, and for other reasons. Students have time now to study and are enrolling in your programs, and so you may want to be able to pre-test them to get a baseline score for NRS reporting, and also to be able to place them and to guide your distance learning instruction. Another benefit of remote testing is to develop capacity within your agency to test distance learners, and we all know that's growing. We're all getting better at it by the day, but this would be adding assessment flexibility to what your agency can provide, not only now but in the future. And simply stated, that remote testing is the wave of the future for distance learning, and so it is something that we imagine you might want to learn about and perhaps either dive into or try out at this time. So what are some of the challenges related to remote testing? Well, you can see there are many. One is the proctor and student access to technology. So they need to have the appropriate devices, and we're going to give you some detail about that later on. But just to say right up front that smartphones are too small to display test questions. So that is not a way that at this time we are able to deliver NRS approved tests. Another consideration and possible challenge is internet bandwidth, because they may be in competition with others in their household. They may simply not have enough bandwidth to meet the demands of taking the test at home. And that could go for either the proctor or the student. Then in terms of the test environment of the test taker, it may not be private where they are. It may be small. It may be noisy. So can they come up with a place to take the test that doesn't have distractions, where they can hear and do it properly? There are new procedures for both the proctor and the student to learn to implement remote testing. So that is something to consider, is are they able to follow along and do all those things that are required to do this? A big challenge is to train proctors who already should know e-tests, but they, as I said earlier, will not know how to give this test remotely. So we have to, and we have developed materials for that, and we'll show you a little bit more about what they are. Test security is a very, very big factor, and we're doing our best to put precautions in place so that that can be maintained, and we will need your help to ensure that. Another consideration is equity concerns. And this is something that, as you I'm sure know, not all of our students have access to, gets back to the technology and the bandwidth and all these things. So these are the challenges. They are considerable, but they are not insurmountable. So what is CASAS' approach to remote testing? And how do we go about coming up with our plan? First of all, we did a lot of research. We interviewed and met with some third-party vendors to see what they had to offer. We looked into some artificial intelligence, AI solutions as possibilities. And then we looked at the various video platforms that are out there. We also talked to some of you, state directors and your staff. We reached out to practitioners who have been doing distance learning for some time and had some insights about how remote testing might work and not work. And here we needed to weigh a number of factors that play into this. One big one is the cost. Another one is the technology constraints, test security, ease of implementation, and then urgency to get this going, because we know that some of you are hot to trot, and we know that, and we would very much like to work with you to get this off the ground quickly. So these were our considerations. And what we have come up with, and we're going to get into the phases, but to begin with, and throughout, we have decided that we will insist on live proctoring, because some of the solutions involve recording and then subsequently viewing. So live proctoring, initially limiting it to one-on-one until the proctors get comfortable. We may be able later to make that one-to-many, but initially we're being cautious. We want the proctor to be comfortable, to be able to provide support to the student if needed, as well as to be able to see what's happening exclusively with one test taker. We're working out the details of this, but we're asking all of the remote test sessions to be recorded. And that is a precaution that allows us to see what, if anything happened, if something gets challenged, we have a way of, it has been documented, we can see what's happening, and it will help us to improve as we go. So it's a kind of protection on a number of fronts. And then we are developing agreements at different levels, at the agency level. Those of you who've been using our e-tests have already signed an implementation agreement for that, but we're going to be augmenting that if you decide to do remote testing to an additional agreement that relates specifically to the demands of remote testing. We'll have a proctor agreement similarly, and then even the student, when they, or before I should say, before they begin the test, will have to agree to conditions such as not cheating and that sort of thing. In terms of cost, we know that there are certainly constraints in adult ed, and we're acutely aware of that, as you are. So we're looking at solutions that are minimal costs, and the video conferencing software like Zoom, these platforms are very affordable. And so that's how we're going to roll out to begin with, using our CASAS e-test software. When we looked at third-party vendor solutions, we found so far, what we've seen is they are expensive. They're $15 to $20 an hour. So that is a part of our later phase, and we are exploring, and let's see if that can come down, or we can see some ways that that's something that you can manage. In terms of delivery, it will be through e-tests with existing proctors, and ideally those who have more experience. We don't really want novice proctors to do this because it's going to pose additional challenges for them to manage it. And they will be required to go through additional training on remote testing that we will provide. Just to be clear, remote testing can only be delivered through CASAS e-tests and not paper testing. And also, just as a note, but also to be clear, that if you are not doing remote testing following our CASAS procedures, then it would be that you would continue to do face-to-face testing, and some programs are figuring out some creative ways to do that in parking lots and cars in various ways. So if you're going to do, or even, having social distancing in a physical setting. So we do know that that is going on, and if you are, if some of your programs are deciding to do that, then that's business as usual, face-to-face, where a proctor must be physically present to administer the test. Now, here are our 3 phases. The first phase starts today. We're calling these clinical tryouts, that's this week, and initial pilots, that's next week. We're starting with Zoom alone, only Zoom, as the one platform, one-on-one. That is one proctor and one test taker at a time. We are rolling out in this clinical tryout these NRS tests, the reading and math goals for ABE and ASE, and life and work reading for ESL. Then, starting on May 4th, again, it will continue to be Zoom one-on-one, but if you're not involved in this initial phase, you can join in starting on May 4th or after that. And we will, there's some additional things to work out with listening because of the audio. So, but we do plan to roll out life and work listening for ESL at that time. We also will be looking into rolling out other platforms than Zoom, like GoToMeeting or WebEx. And then also at that point, we might be able to entertain proctoring with more than one tester. In our phase 3, and we're not sure exactly when that would begin, that's where we might be able to do some piloting with third-party vendors, or maybe there's some other solutions that we haven't considered yet that may emerge. I will say, and this is something we're exploring, that we are considering and looking into embedding video into our own e-test software as a way of delivering this more efficiently. So we'll keep you posted about that. All right, so I don't see anything in the chat box. I'm going to keep going and get into a little bit more detail about phase 1. So just to reiterate a bit, it's starting today, it's one-on-one, it's these tests, and we're calling this Go Remote. So those of you who've been getting going with our e-test, we call that go live. So you already have to have gone live to do this. And that's our first bullet. You've already implemented e-testing, but in order to go remote, there's some other prerequisites. You'll need to, the proctor and the student will need to meet the minimum technical requirements. There is the requirement of agencies to submit the agency agreement, as well as the proctors to submit agreements. And that is after the proctor has completed their training for remote testing. Now, I know there's a lot on the screen, but we do want to impress upon you that these are the minimum requirements for this phase 1 and 2. So the proctor needs a Windows 10 computer or a Mac with that Windows 10 capability that you can get access to on a Mac. So, you know, many of your proctors may not have those, but perhaps your agencies can supply them to them if they're going to do remote proctoring. They need a webcam. They need microphone and speakers. They need Zoom with the paid pro level, which allows them to go for more than 40 minutes. It has some other features. It's not that expensive. I believe it's just about $15 a month. So it's still very reasonable, but it can't be a free account because that's limited. And then this is perhaps a challenge, but necessary for the smooth running of the test, is that we need a minimum 2 megabits per second of download speed. So in our guidelines, we have instructions about how to determine this. There are some websites that they can go to check what their download speed is. Then for the test taker, our students, well, if they have Windows 10, that's great, but it can be a laptop, a desktop, or a tablet computer. It can also be done on a Mac, desktop or laptop, or an iPad with these minimum features. They need a webcam. They need a microphone and speakers. They need to install the Zoom client. And they also need this minimum 2 megabits per second of download speed. I will just mention that we are looking into Chromebooks, and there are some challenges there, and we're looking and hoping to solve them. Let me maybe pause just for a second there, and I do see there's a question. Will only proctors who are also certified as coordinators be able to schedule and administer assessments? Or will the coordinators continue to be responsible for scheduling assessment and the proctor starting the sessions and performing the proctor roles? Richard, would you like to answer that?
Hi. To the policy of the agency. So agencies may have set up a policy where the coordinator has a proctor doesn't, but the proctor could be given that ability. So it's really up to your own policy.
Okay. I see there were a couple of comments about language barriers and digital literacy being also challenges that we can add to our list. Thank you. All right. Now, as I mentioned, there's an agency remote testing agreement. One per agency we need if you're going to do remote testing. You'll be telling us how you're going to verify the student's identity, because we know that many of you have different ways of doing that. So that's something that we need to know. Then there are quite a few agreements, and they are all listed in the remote testing guidelines document. So we would provide you with that document, and before you sign this agreement, we would ask you to read that document and agree to all the things that relate to student privacy, including taking care in the storage of the recordings, everything to do with test security, assuring that you have the appropriate technology, and that you are able to follow the test administration requirements. This is just the current cover, simple cover of the CASAS remote testing guidelines. We have a clinical tryout version that we've completed, and we'll be working with, we have 6 agencies that we're starting with this week to be our clinical tryout sites. So they'll be working with very closely with CASAS tech support staff as they work through offering this, and there's step-by-step instructions in this guide that and exactly what to say and what they need and everything, well, as much as we can think of right now, and we'll be adding and to that and revising it and updating as we go. So this is the clinical tryout version. We'll have undoubtedly we'll have another version next week, and then we'll have another one for May 4th when we roll it out. So this is just to let you know that there is this documentation, and we have other training tools. Will be webinars for proctors. This document I just mentioned, we're making some short how-to videos to help both proctors and students as they embark on this. And also we'll have FAQs that we'll continue to add to. As I mentioned, at least in this initial phase, we'll have what we're calling partners for each of the agencies involved to make sure that they can manage, and also very much for us to learn as we go and how to improve in this. So one of the things that we have decided to require, partly because our students are sometimes not very familiar with the technology, is that the process will be that there are 2 sessions that the proctor meets with the student. One is before testing day. They meet to confirm that they have the appropriate technology, to go over all the test procedures, answer any questions. And the idea for this is to make sure everything's set, to make sure the student is actually eligible to take part in remote testing, and very much so also to make sure the test taker is comfortable with this process, because it is not a way that they've ever tested before. And so it's a way to help them feel comfortable, because we are going to be tracking all of the tests that are given remotely, because we hope that by taking some of these measures to make the student comfortable, that they'll be able to perform as well as they normally would. But we will be looking at that to make sure that we are getting a similar level of student performance with the remote testing as we do with face-to-face. Another thing that will happen in that testing, before testing day session, is that we'll inform the test taker that they're going to be recorded and that they're going to be monitored in the entire time on video, because that is something that, could make them slightly uncomfortable, and we just want to prepare them for that and explain that it's necessary, and that we will be recording, but that we're not going to, that we'll keep the recording confidential, and that it will be only kept for a certain amount of time. Then on testing day, there is a very detailed process for these e-test certified proctors to set up the test in e-tests. And the way it will work is that the proctor will have their computer registered. So if it's not a computer that was normally used in your agency, they'll have to register that computer as a test station. Then they will open up and start the e-test session on their computer. That's the proctor's computer, which is a Windows 10 computer. And then, using a feature called remote sharing on Zoom, they will share their screen to the test taker's screen, and that's how they will conduct this live one-on-one testing via Zoom. They will be able to see the student taking the test on video, and they will be able to see the student who will actually take the test on the student on their own computer. So that is how it will work initially. And here's a screenshot of what the proctor's screen would look like. So it wouldn't be practice items, although that could be what they also might do to begin with to make the student comfortable. But the test would appear on the proctor's screen as well as on the student's screen. And then this would be the test taker showing on the proctor's screen. I see there's a question. The computer will need a working camera on it? Yes, a webcam. Or it could be a webcam that's attached. Richard, is that anything to add there?
Not really, that's correct. If it's a laptop, it most likely has a webcam built in, but if it's not, they probably have to get an external webcam to sit on top of the monitor.
Mm-hmm. Okay, I'm going to carry on. Now into phase 2. Again, starting beginning of May, still one-on-one with Zoom, adding listening, other platforms, and possibly going one-to-many. You know, we'll see. The proctoring, we'll see how challenging it is to do one-on-one, and we assume it's going to be more challenging to do it one-to-many. And even when we say more than one, we are imagining not more than 4 or 5, and you know that would mean that the proctor would have to be adept. They would have to have a screen that's large enough to really clearly see you know, and the students and everything that's going on with them. Then in phase 3, this is where we're going to be exploring working with third-party vendors. Undoubtedly, there will be more options that are that emerge. So we'll keep you posted. We'll be having more of these webinars and keeping you posted in various ways on our CASAS website. We have been trying to update that every Friday to give you an update on where we are with remote testing. So another thing that we are putting in place is the ongoing monitoring and research behind this. We will be adding a mechanism to track which tests are given remotely in eTests and in TOPS Pro Enterprise. And then that will give us the ability to compare student performance on taking the test remotely versus in person. And it will also give us the ability to monitor any test security issues in remote testing. You know, there are some ways that we can do that by looking at the back-end data to see if tests were done very quickly, which could indicate guessing, or there are other ways. So I'm sure we'll be adding to this list of how we're going to be monitoring and researching this, but these are the things that we're thinking of to begin with. We have a couple questions. In the one-to-many, would all the test takers need to be taking the same test? Richard?
No, they wouldn't. So e-tests will identify each student individually and know what their previous tests were. So they could all be taking a different test.
Do third-party vendors supply the proctors? Yes, they do. Although some of them, we understand, might also have a mechanism for allowing us, or agencies that is, to supply the proctors, so we can see how that works. I think it actually can go both ways. Okay. Oops. Let's see. This is where I wanted to share with you that we have added a field in TOPS Pro Enterprise where you can indicate that students were not able to test due to, we're using this fancy term, force majeure, which means forces beyond our control. and that is the COVID-19 virus in this instance. That was released last Wednesday in Topsboro Enterprise. And Richard, I'll let you, if you would like to add anything about this right now.
I would just advise, I mean, you can use that now, and you can start identifying students if you like that aren't able to test, but my advice would be to wait, just because what I'm thinking at the moment is if we wait until July 1st, we'll know already who tested and who didn't. And then we could probably auto-populate all your students for you. So I think you'd be going to more effort if you try to do it right now manually. And I think we would be able to assist you on July 1st to do it automatically. So that's something we still need to talk with states that are interested in this on a policy, but that's just my advice for the moment.
Thank you. All right, well, we're already getting some questions and comments from the field, but this is a place in the presentation where we can entertain more and more of them. I see we have a question from Phil Anderson. Yes, definitely, the proctor needs more training. That is absolutely required. And so that is something that is absolutely going to be part of the process. And I see what you're saying is also for other agency staff as well. So we will see, we're trying to cover as much of that as we can in this remote testing guidelines document. And so we're hoping that if the agency administrative staff read that, as well as the coordinators, that they'll have an understanding of what is needed. But if we find that they also need training, we can certainly develop training specifically for them. Yes, we are recording this session. We'll make the PowerPoint available to you. Question from Laura Anderson. If the learners are taking the assessment in the proctor's computer, how will they be able to run multiple learners at one time?
So that advantage only works when you're in one-to-one. So that's one reason we like one-to-one, is because now the student doesn't have to be responsible and technical enough to register their own computer. And the proctor can do it for the student. As soon as you go to one proctor to many students, then the students have to be coached into registering their computer, which we think is, probably viable, but we'll learn more through our clinical trials and pilot.
Question from Carla from Nebraska. Will the training be available online on your training site? Yes, we haven't exactly figured out how to make it available, but it will be available. We are going to be onboarding remote testing sites, carefully and, with some steps to do that. So, we'll have to see exactly what the process is. If you remember, there's a slide that talks about minimal requirements and an agency agreement to get going. So there will be a process, and it will be kind of similar to our going live with eTest, but it will be a go remote process. And then as part of that process, the training will be there. We do have a question about how the recording will be stored, and that is something we're looking into because we know that that could be a challenge. These are video recordings and they could be large. And so it's something we're actively looking into, and we'll be able to tell you more about that soon.
And let me just also say, we also expect to delete those videos after a week or so. We don't want them hanging around for too long, and that's also to reassure the student that they won't be hanging around.
Mm-hmm. There's a question about, yes, we are doing our national webinar, regular monthly one on Wednesday, this Wednesday, and we'll be covering a lot of these similar points, but it will be slightly different because it will not be targeted to state directors and state staff, but it will be very similar. It will be about remote testing in our plans. Nancy Olson, hi. It appears that agreements will only be between local programs and CASAS and not the state agency. Well, that is how we have worked so far, and yes, that is how we intend to proceed, but we definitely will be working for sure with you at the state level. That's really the first step in all of this. We won't work with any agency in your state until we know what at the state level you are planning to do. So if your state is deciding to go ahead with remote testing, then, and we know that from you clearly, then we will go ahead with it with them. If you have certain requirements for that, you'll tell us that, and we'll take care to ensure that we follow those guidelines. If your state has decided to hold off, and if we get a request from one of your local programs, then we'll have to see how we go. I guess we might refer them to you, and then if you agree to let them pilot, or whatever, however you decide to go, we can then go from there. Pat, would you like to add anything to that? Maybe not. Okay, let's keep going. Will the clinical tryouts include literacy students, the Form 27R? I don't think we're going to start with those students, frankly. I mean, I think we don't want to exclude them by any means, but I don't think we want to learn about this with them. I think as we get more experienced, and you all do, we definitely want to include them. And with this method that we're using, where the proctor is managing the test and the student, especially if it's an iPad, for example, with a touch screen or any touchscreen device, it should be rather simple for the student to follow along once they get set up. So, that's why we're going with this initial approach with the one-on-one Zoom remote sharing process, because we do hope very much to include literacy students.
Linda, I
Yes.
want to respond to the state level questions.
Mm-hmm.
Our understanding at this point from Octave is that state directors at this time are not required to amend and submit the state assessment policy to include remote testing. But I think that it would be a really good idea, if a state is going to proceed with remote testing, that you take a look at your current state assessment policy and look at how it might be amended or an addendum to it if you're going to proceed with remote testing. So it always starts with the state and whether or not you're going to proceed with the remote testing and under what conditions.
Yes, there's a question about whether we have to have an agreement with each learner. And the way we are working that out is that we have a short statement that the proctor reads at the beginning or before giving the test, and the student agrees to verbally. So that's how we're getting there. And also, as I mentioned earlier, in the setup session before testing, the proctor will inform the student that they will be recorded on video. And so if the student is uncomfortable with that, they would have an opportunity to decline if that's something they don't want to have happen. Then Gilda, I saw you asked about how you're going to tell us if you want to do this or not. And so we have set up an email address that we will use to field any kinds of communication about remote testing. So while you're considering whether or not to do this, if you have questions, or if you want to go ahead with it, one way you can contact us is to send an email to this remotetesting@casas.org, or you can always, of course, email any one of us, Pat, Jane, me, to let us know. And I would say too that if you would like to set up a meeting with your state's team, if you have specific questions, I guess I would ask that you send an email in advance with the questions that you have. And if we can easily resolve them through email, then that's, I think, efficient all around. But if there are things that you would like to meet with us about, we're more than happy to set up, individual state meetings to go through any things that you think are specific issues in your state. Catherine Porter's asking, did I understand you say that Chromebooks are not yet compatible with these remote procedures?
I can take that one, Linda.
Mm-hmm.
So the issue with the Chromebooks is that it has a kiosk mode, which is designed specifically for having secure tests on the Chromebook. And although Zoom and other web conference software say, oh yeah, we're compatible with Chromebook, well, they're not anticipating that you're in kiosk mode. And so we've tried it now with Zoom and others, and that is a problem since the kiosk mode blocks the web conferencing software from working. But we have actually already found a workaround for that. It does require using, Google has a remote Chrome software that will make this work. So we would like to work with anyone who wants to do a clinical trial with Chromebooks.
Are there any other questions? Here we go.
Linda Sue Pearson said that the policy information that we talked about should be mentioned in the Wednesday webinar. So we will definitely add that so that local agencies know that they need to follow their state assessment policy, and that will be communicated by the state director of the state staff.
Mm-hmm. Sure. And the question about the Wednesday national webinar was answered in the chat box. It is, in fact, I have it here. It is on our website. On the right, you'll see there's a What's New section, and you can click on monthly webinars there, and the dates come up, and the link is there on the website for this. And after that, the next one is on May 20th. So this is open to everyone. We do also record those sessions, and I have a feeling it's going to be a big one. So you might want to tell your agencies to get on early. But if we get too many people, we will record it, and we have also, just FYI, an archive of these on the website. Any other questions? I can go back to any slide if you'd like to revisit anything and have a longer look at it.
Linda, I was just wondering when the Proctor training is going to be available.
Well, we are starting with it tomorrow with our clinical tryouts. So, and it's going to be evolving as we move through our clinical tryouts and then a phase 1 and then on to rollout. So it needs to be ready, of course, before you can start doing this. And so we have that guide that I showed you. We have a version, and the Proctor training is in there. At least all the step-by-step instructions are already there. And we are going to be working in the next 2 weeks to come up with the various training tools, some how-to videos and FAQs, so that they'll be fully equipped to do this.
Will that be available just on your website or only for those programs doing the clinical trials?
For the moment, it will only be, for the next 2 weeks, we'll just be working with the clinical trial and pilot sites. But, and so we'll just be sharing it because you can imagine right now it's a clinical trial, tryout version. So we're not going to make it more widely available until we have worked through the clinical tryout kinks. And then we will make those changes, and then we will send it out. Now, I guess imagining what you might like to know, you might like to see that to get a more detailed idea, and that we can share with you, you know, as long as you don't distribute it widely.
That would be wonderful. Thank you.
Yeah.
In regard to the question about the student registering the computer, they will in a situation where the proctor has more than one student. But if it's one-to-one, what we're able to do is use a desktop sharing feature of Zoom so that the proctor registers their own computer for the student to use. So if you're one-to-one, the student does not have to register a computer. But if it's one-to-many, then the student does.
So I just want to clarify these requests for the remote testing guide. I think we know that we've already, and Tracy, I see you're asking, you know, we know that Texas is interested in this. And so, you know, and you have one of the, you have 2 pilot sites, as a matter of fact. So, you know, we'll be sharing that with you, and any other state, as you know, if you would like more information, we're happy to share where we are with you so far. And if you want to be part of the, as I said, we have 6 agencies that we're working with this current week. Those are our clinical tryout sites. We are open to more agencies to work with next week, but again, it'll be limited in our, what we're calling the pilot for phase 1. And then after that, we will be making it more generally available. But of course, if you think of getting started, you'll need to allow time to get the proctors trained and make sure all the technology requirements are met by them and others. Other questions? I did ask if people could type in their name and agency and email. I know you all registered, but we would like to know who actually attended today. So if you don't mind doing that, that would be helpful. And if you, I see you're all doing it. If you're interested in piloting, you're already letting us know. That's great. And we'd appreciate it if you'd also send an email to the remote testing at CASAS.org, and that way we can easily track your interest. Other questions?
If you gave us your name earlier, you don't have to give it again. We have it at the top of the chat.
And I will mention that, sorry for the scrolling. Oops. The webinar is being recorded, and we will, I believe we did get to all the chat box questions. So, but we do have a section on our website for National Consortium and Certified Trainers. And we will post the recording and the PowerPoint there. Now, if you are not, if you don't have access to that part of the website, Christine, if you could put your email in, please. And Christine Maines, if you could contact Christine, and she can guide you in getting set up to get access to that part of our website. It's a portion of our website that's not open to the general public. It's just for our state directors and National Consortium and certified trainers. So if you need assistance to get into that, please contact Christine. There it is, kmaines@casas.org. Any other questions? All right, well, Pat, you want to say some parting words?
Yeah, I just have to remember to unmute myself. We're very, very grateful to be working with all of you And this is a journey that we're taking together, and we're learning a lot along the way. And that's why we're so cautious. We want to make sure that what we come up with in the end is doable, it's feasible in the field, it takes into account the student population that we're serving, and that it's a viable choice for you. So we can't do that without your help. And we very much appreciate those that have stepped forward to say that they'll be a part of our clinical tryout or piloting. And that really helps everybody so that we can get it right. And thank you so much for your time today. And please stay safe, stay healthy, and don't go stir crazy with your sheltering in place. We'll get through this together. Thank you all very much.